Hi, everyone. This is Jenny. Welcome to Miami Lit Podcast. I have a very special guest with me today, director Leon Lee, whose latest film, Unsilenced, is so magnificent beyond so many words that I feel like we just need to dive in because there's just so much to unpack with that film. Thank you, Leon, for being here once again.
Thank you.
How's it been since the release of the film?
Well, recently, we have released it online. So it's on Amazon, iTunes, Google Play, etc. So we've been getting lots of feedback because back when the film was released theatrically, it was still at the center of the pandemic, and many theaters were either closed or require vaccine certificates. So many people wanted to go, but were not able to or felt uncomfortable. Now they had a chance to see the film, and it was great getting all these feedback from the audience.
Yeah, I unfortunately it wasn't showing in any of the theaters around us here in Miami, so we had to wait for it to become available online, and it was worth the wait. It's very incredible. This film, I think it's one of those that's gonna stand the test of time for sure. I see it being used in classrooms, and it's just it has so much value. Before we truly get into the film, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your road to becoming a filmmaker. How is that?
I had a love for cinema since I was a boy. And I remember sometimes skipping classes to go to the movies if there are new movies coming. And I got my hands on a little TV. So I was doing some of, recording and just play around. But it wasn't until 2006, after I moved to Canada, that I seriously, started making films. And the first one was a documentary, Human Harvest, that the one I was hoping I could finish in a few months. And it turned out to be an 8-year endeavor.
Really?
But that was how I started making films.
Wow. I did not know Human Harvest took that long to make. That's impressive and crazy. That's actually how I first became aware of your work, was through that film. And I was a teacher a while ago, a high school English teacher. And that film, we should do a unit on human issues affecting humanity. And that film was a part of our curriculum in a way. And it sparked a lot of thought and conversations that I don't think otherwise would have happened. So it's interesting that it took you so long to make.
Well, mainly because it was extremely difficult to find people who have gone to China for transplant and are willing to talk about it on camera.
Right.
Of course, that film was about the allegation that the Chinese regime had been harvesting organs from prisoners of conscience in China. Mm-hmm. And we eventually were able to find 3 cases. They were all from Taiwan, who went to mainland China for their transplantations and the wild stories that happened to them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those films that stay with you because you just don't want to think that those things happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, even after all those years, with all the efforts from different organizations, the practice of forced organ harvesting is still happening in China today.
Wow.
And it's no longer limited to the Falun Gong practitioner. Now it's on the Uyghurs, underground church members, human rights activists.
Right. That's very heavy. Very heavy. That film you also wrote, correct? Human Harvest?
Right.
Yeah. How was that experience writing? Because not only just producing, directing, but also writing.
That was a documentary. So,
Right.
more often they're not documentary filmmakers will also write their own films.
Mm-hmm.
Because largely we don't have a control on how things will unfold. And then writing becomes a way of structuring the story so that it's more compelling. And in a way, also more allow more room for the viewers to take in what's really going on. And quite often that happens in the editing process. So while I had an outline of where I think that the story might go, it turned out that none of them worked. So I had to, based on what's really happening and based on what kind of access we were able to get in the end, we had to completely, revamp the structure of the story.
Was that easy for you as a writer? Because sometimes I feel like writers tend to become very attached to their work or the potential of the work. Was it easy for you to change the structure?
I guess in the beginning, the thought process was like, okay, this happened. Okay, let's see what we can tweak the existing structure to make it work. And eventually you realize you just have to let go and be more of an observer than someone trying to interfere, trying to be in the way. Once you do that, and you also recognize that, things happen, and you can't. The more you try to control it, the less effective it becomes. So it's better to trust your audience, trust your work, and just let the story unfold. Yeah. I found that helped me a lot.
Did you, during those 8 years, did you ever have a moment of doubt, thinking this is too difficult, it's too much, I want to pull the plug?
To be honest, many times.
Yeah.
For example, if imagine if you spend years trying to chase a potential interviewee and helping this person overcoming all this difficulties, and eventually you're there, about to start the interview, lights are on, camera rolling, everything is ready, and then they basically tell you, I can't do this. I'm just, I got cold feet. Don't want to do this. Now what, right? So these are the really the most challenging moments. Unlike narrative films, you can try to find actors, which, by the way, proved not really any easier.
Right.
But here you need people who have gone there, who have experienced all these things themselves, which, by the way, are quite traumatic for them.
Yeah.
And for them to open up and tell you what really happened. So all in all, it was really challenging. But after the film was released, it caused quite a splash internationally. We screened in multiple congresses and parliaments all over the world, and adding the efforts from all the other organizations and individuals, we've seen some progress. China actually openly admitted that they were indeed using organs from death row inmates, which they denied all along, and they promised they would stop doing that. But it was short-lived. Soon after, they started using organs from death row inmates again, and they just changed the talking points. Now they're saying something like, death row inmates also have human rights. So if they want to donate their organs, they should be allowed to do so. So overnight, all these death row inmates become voluntary donors.
Right.
So it's unfortunately still happening.
It's very questionable that you all of a sudden have this huge number of volunteers.
Right.
It's very convenient. Yeah.
Yes.
That I was not aware of that. I thought they were just, forced to do so. I didn't realize they had pulled a volunteer card. Now.
Yeah.
Wow. It's quite an uphill battle. There's a common denominator between Human Harvest and Unsilenced, and that is, and excuse my mispronunciation, Falun Gong, which is, for those that don't know, would you explain it quick?
Right. Falun Gong, as I understand it, is a spiritual discipline that has a long history in China, but it was only made public in 1992 by Mr. Li Hongzhi. He started teaching the practice which centers on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance all over China. And until 1999, the people practicing Falun Gong grew very rapidly. According to the Chinese government's own estimate, there were over 70 million to 100 million people practicing Falun Gong. So you can see them practicing in the morning, in the parks, everywhere. They were not only welcomed by the party in China, but also in a way supported, because they realized that Falun Gong had tremendous health benefits. And the premier at the time even commented on how much saving of healthcare costs the practice is bringing to the country. So it was all going very well. And then President Jiang Zemin one day realized that the number of people practicing Falun Gong outnumbered the membership of the Communist Party. And he wasn't happy.
Of course.
In the meantime, he felt that the very philosophy of truth, compassion, and tolerance contradict the core ideology of the Communist Party, which functions based on propaganda and violence. If a large number of people in China actually believe in truth, actually insist on telling the truth, then how would the propaganda of the Communist Party even work? So he launched a brutal crackdown in order to eradicate Falun Gong in China in 3 months. Of course,
almost overnight.
Right. Of course, then it was yet another political campaign in China. People were arrested, hundreds and thousands of them sent to prisons, all the torturing, all the children were kicked out of school because their parents were practitioners. Husbands were forced to divorce their wives. Another disaster. And of course, the Falun Gong practitioners didn't just sit there and do nothing. They wanted to tell the people what's really going on. And it seems that they not only they believed in truth as a philosophy, they actually stand up for it. So they started this grassroots campaign to disseminate information, to tell people what's really going on. Because the government pushed out a lot of propaganda, as most communist regimes do, to defame Falun Gong. That's what basically the students in Unsilenced were doing in real life and in the film. And that's what continues to this day. So if you go to China now, probably you won't see somebody practicing Falun Gong in the public. But through all my interviews, what I learned is that millions of people still practice in China. They still continue their efforts. and a large population in China are gradually waking up.
Thankfully. Was this the first time the CCP intervened between practitioners and their religious practice?
Sadly, no. Since the Communist Party took power in 1949, they started eradicating religions and spiritual practices in China.
Yeah.
All kinds of religions and spiritual practices.
Right. It seems there's no room for spirituality in the Communist Party ever.
Exactly. Yeah. They understandably, they don't want anybody to be above the Communist Party leaders, right? Whether it's the Buddha, the Lord, or Allah, or whoever.
Yeah.
The Communist leader needs to be the supreme
right.
authority on everything.
Yeah. I mean, I remember stories because I wasn't born at that time, but I was born in Cuba. And I remember my grandmother telling us that when Castro came into power, people were taking the portrait of Jesus and just dumping them out on the street. And they had to go to church undercover. No one knew they were going to church or mass or anything like that because that was a big deal.
Right. Even now, if you go to China, you will see many temples. You will actually see many churches, but they're all under strict control.
Yeah.
You have to get a license to become a monk in China. And in the exams, they ask you whether you support the Chinese Communist Party. And I was told they, a couple of years ago, translated the Bible to Chinese again. And with this new translation, they've also made some convenient changes. So it's easier to find support for the Chinese Communist Party.
Wow. Do you think most of the people of China are unhappy with this situation?
There were a couple of things. One, I think most people are busy in their daily lives trying to
survive.
Right. So I doubt that most people are constantly thinking about a regime change. Secondly, lots of events are happening that will force people to think about this issue. For example, many people have heard about the contaminated baby formula incidents in China, the fake vaccine. Once in a while, there will be a major incident in China that will wake people up. People are thinking, what's really going on? How come in a country with 5,000 years of civilization, now we're in a stage that our children can't even have a normal vaccine, right? They can't even have uncontaminated baby formula. Things like that. The extreme lockdown measures in Shanghai recently, lots of my friends who were very supportive of the party suddenly realized, oh my goodness. And they have horror stories. They were just trying to go somewhere and then they were forced to go back and locked up weeks without a resupply, can't go out. In some communities, the local officials even welded the doors of the buildings so nobody can get out. Imagine what if there's a fire?
Yeah.
And many people, it's hard to imagine things would happen in Shanghai, such a big city in this day and age. We've seen the videos online that the whole entire family would jump out of a building because they have no food. They couldn't deal with the things anymore. Pregnant women who cannot go to the hospital to deliver a baby. We've seen people commit suicide because they had an emergency. It was just too painful and they couldn't go to the hospital. People can't go to their chemotherapy appointments. All these things, I think, and thirdly, if you look at the bigger picture, when I started doing this in 2006, for example, compared to now, after Unsilenced was released, and I get feedback from people from China all the time.
Really?
Yes.
So they're aware of your work.
They're aware. I was told some of my films were among the most pirated political films in China.
That's good news.
So as a filmmaker, I thought, wow, that's interesting. I do have distribution in China. So if I look at the bigger picture on how people respond to my films, I can see a trend. Mm-hmm. A lot more people are willing to take the time to understand what's going on, and they are very supportive of my work. So I think overall, I remain hopeful despite the dark times now.
Yeah. That's one of my questions for you. How do you spend so much time, right, writing, producing, and directing these films that are just so heavy and have such real life in the moment impact? Because you're not discussing something that happened long ago or something that might happen in the future. This is going on right now. And so many people's lives are at stake. What keeps you going?
Two things in particular. One is that I had the privilege to talk to people who had experienced the persecution in China firsthand and who had stood up to it. For example, the real life Wong, which is the story that happened in Unsilenced. He was from the Tsinghua University in Beijing, which is considered China's MIT. Mm-hmm. He had a bright future. He was a PhD candidate. He was tapped by the party. And people who are familiar with Chinese politics know that if you are in Tsinghua University, you are tapped by the party, you have the entire world in front of you. You can go into politics. Former President Hu Jintao was from Tsinghua University, went through the same route. You can go to a multinational company, you can start your own business, you can do whatever you want, right? So he had a bright future. He practiced Falun Gong, and overnight he was turned from a party elite to enemy of the state. Now he had a choice to make. He could simply just say, "Okay, I won't do Falun Gong anymore," and life would go back to normal. But he won't. He simply stick to his conscience and continue this horrible journey to expose the crimes and to tell people what's really going on. I found it really inspiring because I asked myself, if I were in his shoes, what would I do? I don't think, to be honest, I would have the guts to do the same thing. But now in the comfort of Canada, in a free country, I can tell their stories. I can bring their stories to the world. So more people will be inspired by them, just as I was. So that was really uplifting for me. And secondly, it was the feedback from viewers I mentioned before. It was really moving to receive a long email. Somebody will detail their transformation, if you like, how they were really advocating the party, because I went through the same process, right? And then one thing made them to look further. They bypassed the firewall in China. They discovered my work. They saw the movie and they was completely blown away. And they started telling everybody they know what happened. So these are the stories that really make me feel, wow, this is really meaningful work.
Yeah. It's worth everything. And
absolutely.
As a viewer, I can tell you it's much more than just appreciated. These are stories that are universal, and they're necessary to document exactly what is happening so that we make sure, as the cliche says, we can prevent it from happening again. And just that alone, it's so impactful. But you mentioned Wang, and that's the big question, right? That people can ask themselves. If you find yourself in his shoes, what would you do? I have to agree with you. I don't think I would have put my life on the line like that. As brave as I would like to think I am, what he went through was extremely difficult. His life was on the line at every second. But yet he just held on to truth. And truth seems to be a theme throughout your films, but especially here in Unsilenced, which the title, it's perfect. How important do you feel it is for us as human beings to stand by truth, even in those extremely difficult times?
That's a great question. Well, I think the importance of truth is, in a way, self-evident, because if we ask ourselves, do you want to be lied to? A very simple question, right? Most people will say, no, of course not. So if we ever want to have any genuine interaction between people, we need the truth. Without truth, just imagine every day in your life, everything turns out to be a lie. Mm-hmm. And how can you even navigate your life? How can you even make any important decisions if you can't discern what is true and what is not? And then for society, if there's no truth, there's no trust. If there's no trust, how can any community function properly? So without even going to any philosophical level, I think people understand truth is important. But what's even more important, in my opinion, is the idea that we have to actively seek the truth, because we all have some sort of preconceived notion on everything. If we don't spend the effort to actively seek the truth, quite often we will be gradually settling in our own bubble without realizing that we are no longer getting the truth. So I think that's important to realize and remind ourselves whenever we hear something, go and spend some time and do your own research, whether it's something that conforms with your notion or not. Find out what's really going on. And only by doing that, number one, you know what happens. And number two, you can make an informed decision. Otherwise, you may think you have a strong opinion on something. You are standing up for the truth, but is that really the truth?
Right. Yeah. And especially in an environment like China and other countries under that situation, truth is non-existent. And like you mentioned, how do you build a community, a society that can thrive if there's no truth? It seems like we have a lot of information nowadays and even misinformation. How do you arrive at truth if you're constantly bombarded with all these half-truths and downright lies?
Right, that's another great question. For me, I think one, we really have to expand our reach. If you always get the information from one source, try to get multiple sources. Just expose yourself to different ideas and try to think rationally, think through what the other people are thinking or are trying to say, as opposed to, try to shut it down in the very beginning. And secondly, I think it's to go back to the basics. Sometimes if you try to justify something with fancy theories and all kinds of stuff, sometimes because they're not the truth, you need so much effort to justify it. Go back to the basics that has been guiding us for thousands of years. The basic interactions between people. What is good? What is bad? If we can all do that, I think things will be more clear. Sometimes we may think we're going forward, but we are actually going backward.
Yeah. We're going backwards or in circles, which is kind of the same, I guess. Continuing on the vein of truth, the world just has so much support now for the idea that communism does not work. Yet we see China and so many other countries, unfortunately, continuing with this idea, right, that this is how society should be run. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a very insightful question. I have a few thoughts came to mind. One, overall, I think we're on the right track, because there are probably more than 50 countries embracing socialism or communism after the Second World War, right? One way or another. Now there are only a handful. So for a long time, we haven't seen more countries turning communism. So that's the trend. We're on the right track. Secondly, there's no denial that the thought of communism and socialism is gaining some tractions. They've always been there, right? Even in the West, but now it seems a new generation came about and somehow felt that that's the solution. This is not new, because many people in China and in other countries, they embraced socialism and communism with the same enthusiasm, thinking that, this is the solution. But you have to look at the real life experiments. After millions of people slaughtered, after all the war, famines, all the terrible persecutions, if you seek any empirical evidence, you would know that no matter how fancy it sounds on the paper, in theory, this thing doesn't work. And if you still don't have doubt, instead of trying to validate something on paper, I have a suggestion. Go to China.
Yeah.
Spend some time there. Don't just be a tourist. Go to the Great Wall and then have some fancy food and think, it's great. Voice your opinions on something. Publish things online.
Yeah. And see what happens.
Tell people how you feel. Just say 10% of the things you're allowed to say in the US, for example, and say them in China. And see what happens. If you experience firsthand what's happening in a so-called communist or socialist country, then you can make up your mind whether something is working. And if you really like it, you can stay there.
It's funny that you say that, because so a friend sent me a clip of a lady that worked for some organization. I think I don't recall what it is right now. She's somewhere in middle America, middle of the United States, and she's giving a speech on how Cubans vote every couple of years for their constitution, and how it's so helpful for their society and their healthcare, and how the United States needs to adopt this idea. And then I'm thinking, like exactly what you said, why don't you go over there? And I keep digging, and she does. She goes over there, and she, on the Great Samaritan ship of goodness that she brings with her, all these medicines for the amazing healthcare that they have. And yet she's still spewing all this nonsense. I don't understand. I was at a loss. So
yeah, well, I read a joke sometime earlier this year. It's if there were sort of exchange programs like that, if you go to the U.S. embassies in China, you'll see a long line all the time. I guess it's the same thing in Cuba. People are lining up trying to come to the U.S. or Canada, and then you have people here in the Western world who are praising the Chinese regime. Mm-hmm. Let's do an exchange program. Let the people in China who want to come here, and people here who want to go there.
Yeah,
all settled. No more arguments.
Exactly. Easy fix.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you look at what all these people go through to get to places like the United States and Canada. They risk their lives all the time. My father was one of them. He and a couple of other guys stole a military raft in 1991 and took to the ocean and came here.
Wow.
And thankfully they made it, but there's so many that don't, and they lose their lives. And yet we have people claiming it's so amazing over there in our countries. But I want to get back to Unsilenced. And when we're talking about truth, let's discuss a little bit censorship, because that's the opposite of truth, I feel like. How do issues affecting human rights in China affect the West? Because most of us feel like, well, that's happening way over there. There's nothing for me to do. There's nothing for me to concern myself with. But as we know, that's not necessarily the case.
That brings me to, that was the very question on my mind when I made the film Letter from Masanjia.
Yeah.
Which was about an SOS note discovered by a woman in Oregon, Julie Keith. He bought this package of Halloween decoration from Kmart. And the note came out. It was from someone in the notorious Masanjia labor camp. They were forced to produce these Halloween decorations under horrific conditions. We were able to track down this letter writer, and the international publicity actually brought down the entire re-education through labor system in China. It was a powerful story. So that's the perfect story to illustrate that human rights violations in China had a direct impact on our daily lives here in the West. The things you buy could be manufactured by slave labor in China. And if you know that, when you celebrate whatever holiday or festivals, I think it brings in another level of understanding of what's going on there. So that's to put it simply. But more on a broader level, if the Chinese regime is emboldened to persecute its own people, to do whatever they want, their ambition is not limited to the borders of China. Now we see the aggressions of the communist regime in the South China Sea. We see that they are actively working to somehow invade Taiwan and, take democracy and freedom from the 23 million people in Taiwan. We see that China had a long-term plan to replace America as the dominant force in the world. While America has all its problems and mistakes and all those, I think if you just think for a moment, what if China was calling the card?
Right.
What if
our lives would look completely different?
Right? So then they will export all these policies worldwide. And then where do people go? So
Yeah.
it's a real danger to the world. And I'm glad that more people, especially governments all over the world, have realized that the Chinese Communist regime is the existential threat, and I mean no exaggeration, to our way of life in the West.
Definitely. Yeah. That's a lot for people to consider. And it's more than just surface level, like you said. As you mentioned, Human Harvest and your other film are more documentary style, whereas Unsilenced, we have a dramatization of real life events. Was there a reason why you chose to film it this way as opposed to another documentary?
I look at each story and ask myself, what would be the best way to tell this particular story? And for the Human Harvest and Letter from Masanjia, for example, if we were to make a narrative film, people wouldn't have believed it. They would think how can someone write an SOS note and end up in America? This is just pure fiction, right?
That's a good point. I never thought of that.
And for another short film I made called Ragdoll, I made it using stop motion animation. You can actually watch it free on YouTube. Ragdoll stop
I'm
motion.
Do that.
I think we have 1.2 million views now. And that was about the experiences of orphans in China whose parents were killed because of their whether political stance or spiritual practices. There are many orphans in China. And when I heard their story, my heart broke for them. The things they have to deal with, and even at a very young age. So that one I thought, interesting. Especially the young girl I interviewed, she was actually making dolls in a labor camp in Shanghai. So this made me think, okay, maybe I can do a stop motion animation from a doll's point of view. A children's imagination, children's innocence, right? And from their point of view, to experience the traumatic events of persecution in China and see what happens. That's why I made stop motion animation for that story. For Unsilenced, it happened quite some time ago, and Wong had already spent, I think, 8.5 years in a Chinese prison. He survived and he's in the US. It would be very difficult to make a documentary. And even if we were to do it, it had to heavily rely on reenactment. I thought, what if I would do a narrative film so that people, there's a broader appeal in a sense. Some people don't like watching documentaries. There may be
they're missing out.
Yeah. So that's why we pick different genre and formats for different kinds of stories.
Yeah, well, this one fitted beautifully. It's very enthralling, and the actors did such a fantastic job. They were amazing.
Yes, the actors are extremely talented, but also very brave. Very brave.
Yes. Yeah. I would like to discuss briefly your difficult endeavor into finding the actors, because from the research that I did, it wasn't as simple as one would think.
Right. We obviously need some Chinese-speaking actors. And understandably, almost all Chinese-speaking actors one day want to develop their career in China. China is now, I think, into 2020, it surpassed the US to become the largest box office in the world. So even for those actors who are not in China now, they don't want to completely shut down the door. So that was very difficult to find Chinese-speaking actors, even English-speaking actors in America or Canada. Many of them are hoping that they may be in Hollywood productions one day. They don't want to ruin the opportunity because those films will likely want to distribute in China. So,
Wow.
All in all, we had actors backing off even after accepting our offer, days before productions were to start. We had locations canceling on us. So within a 2 month period, I believe our core team had only 1 day off because almost every day after a long day of production, we had to scramble to find new locations or cast new people just to continue the production. So all in all, it was. It's safe to say that Unsilenced is the most difficult project I've made so far.
Wow. That just adds a whole different layer to the viewer's experience, to take all that into account. And now to think about the pressure that people in your world, doing this craft have to deal with when it comes to Hollywood and appeasing all these what ifs. That's...
And sometimes the pressure is real for these people. For example, one actor, because part of the film was shot in Taiwan, obviously we can't go to China to film this. And even in Taiwan, there was an actor who was a very talented actor who accepted a role. And then guess what? A prominent figure in the Taiwan film industry who also had close connection to the government went to his house and told his family that he cannot accept this role because this will be suicide in his career.
Wow.
Although this actor really wanted to do this, he did not want his parents and whole family to worry. He had to back out.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about Taiwan, the one place that really stand up to all the pressure because your very life depends on it.
Mm-hmm.
But
how ironic is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That's such a shame. It's because unfortunately when you're dealing with these types of regimes, it's not just you. They bring everyone you love into it. And they tear down everything that matters to you. So it's not like you could say, I'm going to sacrifice myself. Because you're bringing down the whole village.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's tough. Would you return to China if you were allowed?
There is no official ban on me going back to China now. But it's safe to say if I go back, I may not be able to come out again.
Exactly.
So that's not a good idea. And I don't take any flights operated by Chinese airlines. And I don't ever cross their airspace.
Okay. Wow. That's a lot to think about, I'm sure, as you go through life. That's I'm stumped. I did not realize it was that serious, which, I mean, of course, what was I thinking?
I'm no exception because many dissidents or, writers or any kind of artists or political dissidents faced the very same situation.
Right.
I myself were harassed. My family members were harassed by the officials. I've got death threats. All kinds of things happen. They try to interfere with my work. They intimidate my funders. They labeled me a traitor on state media. But everybody goes through the same process, it seems, if you have done some meaningful work. But then after some time, it'll go quiet. because they realized you're not backing off, short of eliminating you for good. Anything they do will only promote your work. So
Oh,
they
I
sort
see.
of stop,
They ignore
Uh,
you in the hopes that you might just go away.
yeah. Yeah. Well, they try to bribe you. They try to, but then if nothing works, it seems they stop doing those stuff for a while. Something may pop up again. But in the end, here's the deal. For me, if people like Wang can do what they do in China, I can tell their story in Canada. They are the ones truly risking their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And they trusted me with their stories. The least I can do is to tell their stories the best of my ability. And at least next time I see them, I can look into their eyes and tell them I did what I can.
Yeah, I can understand that. And telling the stories you did, and in such a masterful way, that last scene on Silence, or one of the last scenes when the journalist gets on that boat, is just so powerful, because that at least there's some hope out of all of that. I'm curious, what was your favorite scene from the film?
Well, since I wrote them, so I like most of them.
All of them.
Yes, but for me, it's the genuine emotion. For example, when Wang had to leave the university and he had to say goodbye to his professor, and no words could describe how he felt, because the professor have treated him as his son, and Wang knows full well the kind of trauma that the professor must have been experiencing, losing his son again, right?
Right.
But he had to say goodbye, and he couldn't face him, so he had a simple bow, and that's it. It was moments like that. It was moments when the professor, after all, losing his sons, and then living through the Cultural Revolution, all the propagandas, and finally summoned his courage to translate the article to Chinese and distribute it himself. You can see determination on his face. A very simple scene, but I think that's quite powerful.
Yeah, definitely. It's so interesting because the film's title is Unsilenced, but throughout the film we see these moments take place in pure silence, these exchanges, like you mentioned, these subtle looks where they're just so heavy, and there's just so much being said without words being exchanged. It's amazing that it came across so easily. The actors were just fantastic. Yeah. And obviously your writing is reflected throughout. So
Thank you.
Congratulations again. It's such a wonderful film. Do you have any future projects that you can discuss with us?
Yes. A feature film I'm working on is about how an overseas Chinese software engineer was able to defeat the multi-billion-dollar Great Firewall of China through his garage, in his garage.
Wow.
As many people know, that in China there is the firewall. You cannot visit Facebook, Twitter, Google, or most of the Western media websites. So they spend billions of dollars on it with the assistance of companies like Cisco and Western technology giants. So it became very sophisticated. And I was told that many countries are learning this technology from China, kind of like Iran, So
That's another scary thought.
So imagine how difficult it is to punch a hole on the firewall. But then one guy did it. He's continuing doing it. And he largely was, living a private life without raising any attention. But eventually he wanted to tell his story. So this will be a story based on his experience. Hopefully the film will come out sometime next year.
Well, I will be in line to watch that. I'm excited for that. That sounds another worthy story that needs to be told. And
I was just completely blown away by how smart he is to, at one point, how to block his software in China became a top priority among the computer science and networking, computer network departments and universities all over China. And we have students completing their master or PhD degrees, and their thesis was to defeat their software. The Chinese Academy of Science, or I forgot the exact name of the institutions, had grant for top scientists in China to block their software. And they published the papers. And yet, across the ocean, there's one guy in his garage.
right.
No matter what they do, they just can't shut him down.
That's incredible. I can't wait to see that and learn more about him. That's amazing. It's there's a common thread throughout the stories that you choose to tell that I just think it's so important, and that is the triumph of the human spirit. No matter what you're up against, all it takes is that one person that says, no, I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to punch a hole in that wall. And that's priceless.
And very often people ask me, how come the Chinese people don't, stand up, don't do something about it?
Yeah.
They are doing it every day. 10 years ago, there was a stats published by the People's Daily, the Communist Party's mouthpiece in China. They called something like a group incident. Essentially, it was a protest or a riot. Even more than 10 years ago, according to their stats, there were over 20 or 30,000 of group incidents every year in China. So if that's the case, we're talking about China is a big country, but still, this is happening multiple times every day, right?
Yeah.
And after that year, they stopped publishing the stats. So I guess it's increasing. It's not decreasing. And the fact that people sometimes are worried that now China is using artificial intelligence, literally billions of CCTV cameras all over China to control people's social credit score. But I'm actually hopeful. The very reason that they need to resort to those sophisticated technologies to control people is because whatever they were doing before wasn't working anymore.
That's right.
Right?
That's such an interesting outlook. Yeah.
So people are, standing up, and there's one thing that's perhaps the most underreported stories in China by the Western media. It was the movement of quitting the Communist Party and its affiliated organizations, the Youth League, the Young Pioneers, for example. They started in 2004, I believe, quite some time ago. Essentially, there's a website. People can bypass the firewall and go there to denounce their party membership. You can use a real name or an alias. Some people would go to say, I quit. Some people will write a long essay telling, starting from their grandfather all the way to them, how their attitudes towards the party changed. Wow. In the end, they will say, I want to quit. In the beginning, I to be honest, I didn't take it seriously. I thought it's a website. People just go there and say something, Last time I checked, there were close to 400 million people who have
Wow.
gone to the website to quit the CCP and its affiliated organizations. Even if you have to use an alias, it still takes courage to go there and say something.
Yeah.
I believe these people are the seeds. One day, a seemingly small event will happen in China. That will be the spark. And these people who have learned the truth will do something. And you will see a change in China. Probably nobody has ever predicted, even the day before.
Yeah. It's powerful. And the right kind of attitude that we need to continue on until that spark comes. Because that, hearing these stories and living under those conditions it can tend to keep people feeling defeated. But you're right. If we focus on everything, the evidence, it proves that people are aware. Change should be on their way.
And time is on our side. History is on our side.
Yeah.
Dictatorships won't last forever. We know that. So
right.
It could be 1 year, it could be 10 years, it could be a lifetime. We just have to keep going on it. And one day it's going to happen.
Definitely. It's such a pleasure talking to you. I have one more question before I let you go.
Yes.
As you know, we're a literary podcast, so we always end our episodes with some books. Do you have any books that you would like to recommend to us?
Oh, many. But why not take a look at, I believe it's by Michael Pillsbury. He's got a book titled The 100-Year Marathon. He had some very insightful insider knowledge about the Communist Party in China and its long-term plan for the West.
That's scary.
Doesn't look good, but we can't bury our head in the sand, to understand, because there is no real election in China. So they were allowed to plan really for generations. And they had this plan for a long time now.
They were playing the long game.
The long game, really long game. And it's if you look at the game, the game plan that they had decades ago, you would be shocked to see how many of them they've already achieved. Wow. Including how to stir problems in the US in terms of all kinds of ideologies. You can't make this stuff up. That this is it's either an astonishing coincidence or a plan.
Wow. Yeah. I'm definitely gonna put that on my list and read it and learn so much more about it, because there does seem to be a very well thought out plan, because everything's working in their favor, it seems like. That's very scary. But like you said, we can't keep our head in the sand. It's better to know.
Yes.
The truth, once again, the truth shall set you free, right?
Absolutely.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I would like to take the liberty of dedicating this episode to all the victims of communism from all over the world, but especially China. And thank you for all your work and using your craft to tell these stories. I can't wait to see the next film and
thank you.
Learn so much more.
And for your listeners or viewers who want to check out Unsilenced, they can go to unsilencedmovie.com, and there are many platforms they can choose from.
Absolutely, yes, and let us know what you think. how it affected you, because it will have an impact. I can tell you that much. You will walk away with some feelings. So I'd be curious to see how our listeners react. But thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for sharing with us. And to everybody listening and watching, or both, as we always say, time is the top currency, and we're so grateful that you choose it to spend it with us. I hope you took something away from today's episode, although I have a feeling you're going to take a lot away from today's episode, and go enjoy Unsilenced.
Thank you.
Chase your